All right. Well, I want to welcome everyone that's come out to the Fort Kent Public Library this afternoon. We have a very special presentation and a special guest. We have with us this evening or this afternoon, Gandy Dancer. Uh, Other folks might know him as Benjamin Scribner, but this afternoon he is Gandy Dancer, and he is going to be showing us his model railroad operation and how he got into it and how others can get into that particular hobby as well. And so, Gandy Dancer, I want to thank you for taking some time to spend with us and showing us what you know.
Thank you, sir. All right. Thank Andrew here. And anyway, all right, folks. First off, we'll start with the name, Gandy Dancer. Where did it come from? What is a Gandy Dancer? Okay. Back in the early days of rail, before the new automated systems that they have nowadays, men would actually lug the rail to the sleepers, or as you would know them, railroad ties. Other men would take a tool that became known as a gandy, and they would align those rails. And the movements they used looked like dancing. So collectively, they became known as Gandy Dancers. I liked the name, so I borrowed it. That's who I am, and that's my YouTube. And now we'll go ahead and get started. If I can make this thing work. I have to point it that way. On. It would help if I turned it on.
Do it again.
Get that off the screen. We're not getting a picture for some reason, honey. I will get out of that.
Turn off your mouse pointer.
I will.
The very bottom button.
There we go. My first railroad. My parents wouldn't let me keep it because I couldn't get it in the basement. This is actually me right here at the age of 14. This was the Wolfboro, you can read it, Wolfboro Railroad. This ran between Wolfboro, New Hampshire and Salmonville, New Hampshire. And in those days, I was known as a candy butcher. I sold candy and postcards on this. And turn that off. I sold candy and postcards on this. This was a self-propelled coach. The motor, you can see the radiator right here. The motor was in here. This was originally a combine coach, and they turned it into a passenger, and it ran. The steam locomotive and the cars would be in Wolfboro. This is in Salmonville, and my mother took that picture of me. My mother sold tickets for the Wolfboro Railroad out of her gift shop in those days, and she snapped that picture of me. For some of you who think that this is only a kid's toy or a kid's hobby, here are some famous people, some of who you might know. We have Sir Rod Stewart, Tom Hanks, Sir Elton John, Mr. Fred Rogers of the TV show, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, thank you. Michael Jordan, Winston Churchill, David Hasselhoff.
Baywatch days.
From the Baywatch days, yeah. Frank Sinatra, Walt Disney, of course, Gary Coleman. You can see there were many, many more. I couldn't get them all on the same list. I'm going to concentrate on 3 of them. Frank Sinatra. He was a singer, he was an actor, he was a lounge singer. He owned over $1 million worth of Lionel, pre-war and post-war, and buildings. Neil Young, singer from the 60s and the 70s. You might know him from Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young fame. He was also on his own. He actually rescued Lionel from destruction. Lionel was going under. He actually bought the company and owned it for a while. And of course, my favorite, Sir Rod Stewart. This guy, for everybody who says, I don't have time. I don't have time. When do I go to find the time? When am I going to find the time? Rod Stewart, while on tour, he would rent a suite of rooms in the city he was going to perform. A whole suite. when he was not on stage or sleeping, he was working on these model buildings you see here in the background. He was working on scenery. He was working on all of this stuff. When at the end of his tour, he would go home and he would place this on his railroad. He has a large railroad. He was featured in Model Railroader magazine and in Railroad Modeler magazine, and there's also a few YouTubes of him and his railroad. This is the man who was dedicated to the hobby. When he was not sleeping or performing on stage, he was building model railroad stuff. All HO scale, by the way. Getting started. How do you get started in this hobby? Well, I'm going to tell you. You can join a model railroad club if there's one around you. I don't think there's any around here. I don't know. I haven't been able to find one, but then again, I've only been living in this area since May. There could very well be. Hobby shops that specialize in the hobby. Again, around here, that's kind of difficult. I think you have to go to Bangor or way south of here to find a hobby shop that specializes in the hobby. eBay. A lot of what I have over here, I've picked up on eBay. You can find some good quality stuff, used stuff on eBay. So you can go there and then have a layout plan. Have something in your head. We'll get into it here a little bit more in a second. Adventures in layout planning. Here's where we have the layout thing. Create a drawing. Okay, I looked at my basement. I saw what size I had. I mapped it out on a piece of graph paper. And then I drew out what I wanted for a track plan in the space I had. And then I started implementing it. Sometimes implementing it is different than actually drawing it, but we won't get into that, okay? Develop a track plan diagram. Again, this goes back to drawing it out. What do you want? Decide on a wiring plan for running and powering accessories. This is very important. Without the correct amount of power going to your layout, your trains will not function properly. I messed up. I have to add more wires to my layout. There should be power going to the rails, a feeder line going to the rails every 4 to 5 feet. I have one, and I have trouble with my trains. Factors in limiting your layout size. This is a big one. What scale do you wish to model? We have over here G, O, S, HO, and then whatever the Thomas the Tank Engine scale is. And yes, that is model railroading. We also have this. If you put something on rails and put it on something, you are model railroading, regardless of what size it is, okay? So you have to figure out what scale you wish to model. Your available space. Do you have a big room in the basement? Do you have a small spare bedroom? What do you have for space, right? We don't know. Your imagination. This is the biggest thing. Use this up here. Your imagination is going to be the most fun to put one of these things together. It's going to be up to you. The sky's the limit when it comes to model railroading. Identify your interests. What era? Early steam, and we're talking early, okay? The early days of the steam rail. Steam, diesel, the intermittent years from the late 40s, early 50s when they were still using steam engines, and then diesel electrics actually were making it into, and then they finally phased out steam. It's 50s and 60s. Fantasy. There's a guy that has a Star Wars layout in his spare room in G scale. A lot of Star Wars stuff on it. I'll get to him. He's in this later on. Sci-fi. Again, it's up to you. Western, you want Western, Southwestern, Northwest, Midwest. What do you want? Eclectic. You can have anything, a mixture of stuff. I have dragons and stuff on my layout. This is Granny in Reds. This is from Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother. This piece over here will be Hansel and Gretel's confectionaries. It's a fantasy layout. You can do anything you want. Your area, a rail line, a town, or you want to say point A to point B, or come back or whatever, or a mixed. You can have a mixture of the two. You can do whatever you want. Scales and gauges. This is where a lot of people get confused on scale and gauge, okay? Scale is the size of the trains. 1 inch equals so many full scale inches. I used 1/48, which is O scale, as the thing here. 1 inch equals 48 inches. Gauge refers to the distance between the rails from inside to inside. O gauge is 1.25 inches from inside rail to inside rail on that track. And then the others go from there. And now I have them here. Here's your G. These are the most popular. There are others on either side of this. There are some that are big enough you can put in your yard and ride on them. And they go all the way up to half size of a full-scale locomotive. I've seen them online. There's also a new scale that just came out that's T and TT, which is small. I don't know how anybody can even have the eyeballs to see them. These are your scale, the gauges. O is the oldest, started by Lionel in 1900. Then you have S. HO is the most popular. There's more HO scale layouts out there than there are any other right now. And then N. And a Z is up there. I left it there. It's there. I don't have Z. I don't even want Z. N is even too small for me. Once you get older, you find out later I might be doing G. Here's your types of layout. What do you want? A diorama. This is something you put on a shelf. It's a mobile. It doesn't move. It still has a train on it. That's still model railroading. It's a small piece, like a shadow box you'd have in school for your school project, is pretty much what it is. You put that on a shelf and admire it. A garden layout. This is mostly reserved for G scale and some O. Some people do O scale. A frame base. You want a base that's framed and solid, and you want a layout on it with hard wiring. And you can see the track plan. It's a horseshoe kind here. And it's got a lot of lattice work underneath, and it's ready for the scenery to start being put up. A simple oval. This one that's here is 3 rail, so it's O scale. It's on a simple piece of plywood. It's nothing fancy. My first layout actually looked like that. It was a simple piece of plywood in the basement on a couple of sawhorses. It was HO scale. So this is again, depending on your space, this is a shelf layout. You don't have a lot of room, but you got some wall space. You can have a shelf layout. There's a guy, we'll be getting to him in a minute, called Boomer Diorama on YouTube that has a shelf layout. And let me tell you, you can cram a lot of stuff into a shelf layout. And then we have a modular. This is more along the lines of what a railroad club would have. The guys would do this if they don't have a permanent place to set up a layout. They would have modulars where each member of the group would build a section of the railroad. And then when they got together at a place, they put these together and run the trains. It is very precise because your rails have to match from one to the other. It's very, very delicate to make them do what they need to do to get them to match. But that's a modular. And a lot of clubs will use those. And people who go to train shows to perform at a train show will usually have modulars because it's easier to pack them up than a full size like one of these. You don't need to be an expert. Your skill will improve as you go along. Basic model painting, not really required. You can learn. There's enough tutorials online where you can learn how to paint. My grandson picked it up very quickly, I might add, on the painting. It's really pretty easy. Basic soldering skills help, but again, they're not required. You'll learn this stuff. There's plenty of tutorials online to teach you how to solder. I have soldering skills from way back in the US Navy that I haven't used in 30 years, and I stink. But I'm getting better. The old skills are coming back. So you improve as you go. Buildings and scenery. There's a wide variety here. I just put these up as pictures to show you kind of what you can do. But over here you can see there's wooden kits. This is on the bottom end of the wooden kits as far as price goes, okay? This is not one of the high dollar. You look at some of them out there and they're a couple $100 for a kit that's about this size. I haven't got around to building this yet. I need some more stuff to do it before I start it. This is a wooden kit. This is a resin kit. Put this down for a minute. This is 3D printed. There's a lot of detail on this. And this be glued together. It's going to be a little shack. There's some detail parts that came with it here. And there are plasticville. All these, by the way, are O scale, and there are some of these are from the 1950s. This is one of them. It's a barn from the 1950s. It's a snap together. This just snaps together. You can paint these up and make them look more real, or you can leave them as they are. Some people just leave them as they are because they want the authentic experience when they were a kid. So they just leave them alone. Okay? We also have building flats. This is a flat. This goes up against a wall to give your railroad layout some depth. You can buy these. I think I paid $20 for this online. And there's others out there. They're all different styles. There's warehouses, there's factories, there's all kinds. And these will go at the very back of your layout to give your layout a little more depth. Okay, there's that. There's also scratch building. This is scratch built. This is one of the first ones I started scratch building. This was a milk bone box when it started life. We emptied it, and rather than it winding up in a landfill, I decided to see what I could do. So I put together this, which is Granny and Red's Delicatessen and Bakery. So I started with that one. I also moved, here's another plasticville. This is a log cabin kit right here. This is probably the 1960s or 70s. Okay, so they got a little better than the early 1950s, but they're still not, they're good if that's what you want. They're cheap, they're easy to find on eBay all over the place. I'll get to this one here in just a second. This is a Hawthorne Village ceramic building. It's pretty close to O scale. There are some that are closer to S and HO. This one is pretty close to O scale, and they're cheap. I bought a whole box of these things for $20. I spray paint them gray, and then I repaint them myself, and I sometimes just leave, don't paint these, you don't notice them, or I make them look like something else. And then instead of the snow, I put down what's called flocking, fall leaves on it, because I like fall. These are very cheap. It's a good way to get going into it if you want to put some buildings on your layout. This is another building right here that I'm currently working on. This also used to be a milk bone box. This is now Hansel and Gretel's confectionaries, and I'm still working on it, as you can see. Inside here, and it's one side broke loose. These things are kind of delicate, and the glue didn't quite hold. There's pictures of inside of a factory that I set back in to give it a little depth inside the building, so you're not just seeing the windows. This is just some of the stuff you can do. And put the pointer down. And you can see there's a few different other things here you can see. We'll go over. Here's some good sources to look for. These guys are really good. Jason Jensen has an art degree. And again, you don't have to have an art degree, but he builds HO and he is a painter. He's where I learned how to do a lot of the painting that I currently do now. Very good at that. Boomer Diorama. He's from Canada. I do believe British Columbia. And I do believe, after watching him for a while and listening to him, he worked in the Canadian, British Columbia or Canadian film industry. A lot of what he does, if you just took a snapshot of it, you would think you were looking at the real thing and not a model. This guy is fantastic. Marklin of Sweden, I watch him a lot of times for his tutorials. He actually makes water using toilet paper. Yes, toilet paper. And it comes out realistic. He also does some weathering and a few other things. He's a very good, he's funny to watch. He laughs a lot. He's a great guy. Foss Scale Models, Doug Foss. He has basically a shelf layout. Oh, Boomer has a shelf layout in a small area. I wanted to mention that. Doug Foss has I believe it's also a shelf layout. It's very narrow, and he has a lot of stuff crammed into an area. He models part of New Jersey, I believe, from the 1950s and 60s, but he has a very narrow layout, and he's still working on it. He also sells kits, HO scale kits. Jason Jensen just recently got into selling HO scale kits. Neither one of them have much in the way of O scale. O scale is very hard to find sometimes. It can be found. S, that's another one that's very hard to find. And then of course you got me. I watch these guys and I pass on what I know on my YouTube channel. And finally, Shop Kitty. Time for a nap. If you have a cat, and you can see Boomer had one in his cat is always on his layout, it seems. Cats, this kitty right here, she loves to go down and chase around the locomotive when I have it running on the track. She absolutely loves doing that. That's one of her favorite things. And then she was upstairs when I was working on this on the dining room table, and I turned around and she had curled up in the box and went to sleep. Questions and answers.
You want to talk about the difference between, I don't remember the term, but the people that are dead set on realistic versus.
Yes, I will talk about that in the questions and answers. There are some people, and this was one of the things in the earlier when I said, eclectic, fantasy, sci-fi, what you want to do. There are people out there, and if you're in a modeling club, there's people like this. We call them rivet counters. Everything has to be period correct. It has to be just this way. They get really upset and really judgy if you don't do it a certain way. The point is, with a hobby, it's supposed to be fun. If you're getting stressed out, if you want it period correct and you want to do it just so, that's up to you. If you want to do it your way, do it your way. But that's up to you. And it shouldn't be somebody else saying, well, you didn't do this or you didn't do that. That's not a hobby. Hobby's meant to be fun. This is meant to be fun. While I'm here and in the questions and answer portion, we'll talk about some of these scales over here. I will get this out of the way so we can see. Okay, this is G scale. This is a battery operated plastic track, very basic G scale. There's the box car that goes with it back there. There are more expensive G scale trains that run on brass tracks, and they have a transformer and they'll run around in a garden, and they're a lot of fun. They're really expensive. You can do the same thing with this and have just as much fun. This has a remote that comes with it. You can sit there and play, make it go back and forth. They have track options, they have switches. It's still model railroading, okay? Doesn't matter.
What did that used to be?
This used to be 102 Dalmatians. With Dalmatians, it was an ugly blue with Dalmatians all over it. And it was from the movie 102 Dalmatians. They decided to market it for kids. I took it and painted this up for my grandson and made it, if I can get it unhooked here. And of course the fireman falls off. This is Osriel Railroad. And 102 is my old unit number. But this was all painted, and one of the box cars and the caboose and I think another coach were also part of the 102 Dalmatians, and they're not here. I didn't get those, but they were all something else. This is your painting you can do. You can modify your stuff any way you want it. It's your layout. Do what you want. This is G-scale. These are a lot of fun. This is my biggest, and it's heavy, O-scale locomotive, steam. This is a 686. This is actually what's considered O27. It isn't full O-scale. Lionel, back when they came out with these, this is meant to go around a 27-degree radius. If you actually had a full-size O-scale locomotive, it would fall off of a 27-degree radius. Lionel built these. They're not as detailed as some of the newer O-scales, but they're also not as expensive. These can be found on eBay. This was not running, by the way, when I first got it. It now runs. I won't run it on here right now because I have something else on there, my Navy one. This is S. And you can see it's almost the same size as the O27 there. This American Flyer. This is, of course, the gauge that was up there. And it was a mess when I got it. I paid, I think, $15 for it and 7 cars that were rusty. This thing was an absolute disaster. I don't have any track or a transformer to see if it runs or not, but I did rebuild it, so I'm pretty sure it would. This is HO from the 1970s. This came out in 1975, Spirit of 76. We were getting ready for our bicentennial. This is not the one I had, but I did actually have the bicentennial steam set. This is a 460, and the cab likes to pop off on that. And it's a wood-fired locomotive. They made it look like wood in the tender. Some were in the West, where they had a lot of wood, not a lot of coal. They would use wood-fired locomotives. So that's what this is. This is HO actually is jokingly said it's half O, which is almost close to right. And this is, again, it doesn't matter what you model. This is Thomas the Tank Engine set. This is Gordon. It will run on a track. There are tracks for it. This has cogged wheels. I can push this.
This delivery needs to be on time. It's a busy day indeed.
I don't know if that'll come out on there, but it was, anyway, there's somebody I know online that has Thomas the Tank Engine in HO scale running on his layout. He likes Thomas the Tank Engine. There's another guy has O scale, actual O scale, and I'll get into that here in a minute. I have some to demonstrate. He has Lego buildings on his layout and Lego people. So again, it's what you want to do. Now we'll get into, this is an HO scale combine coach. This is an S scale box car. You can see the difference in size. Here's where things can get a little confusing. This is Lionel O scale, O gauge, actually. I won't call it O scale. This is pre-war, and this actually has 2 separate coupling systems on it for the earlier stuff in the 1930s. This by pre-war, this is all metal. And this pre-war was from 1939, I think, to 1942, right at the beginning of 1942. And they were in the middle of changing couplers from this old style, which is right here. I can actually rotate these if I had some others and hook them up together to the what was coming out as the knuckle couplers. That is 027 pre-war. This is 027 post-war. You can see the difference in size. This is a milk car. And this, I don't have any way of demonstrating it here, but you would put, there's metal milk cans that go in here, and it hits a certain spot where there's a platform, and you hit a button, and there's a milkman in here that shoves the cans out onto the platform. This needs some more work. We've worked on it. It's still a little, but we'll get it working. Now, this is actual O scale. You can see the difference in size. This boxcar by itself will barely make it around a 27-degree turn. A locomotive will not. I have run this on my layout, and it's just about clipped the switches when I've gone around. For the switch areas, there's a piece there that tells you which track it's going to go down, and it's really close. I would not be able to run a locomotive on that. So now you can see, and this is, of course, a G-scale boxcar. You can see the difference. So it depends on what you're wanting. And then I did get into this, so we're okay there. So it kind of depends on what you're wanting to do and how you want to do it. I'm going to take a quick sip of water here. As to the hobby itself, how you want to do it. And anything, there are Lego railroads, Lego tracks, Lego trains. It's still model railroading. I don't have any here. I only recently found out about them, and then I went and looked at the cost of them, and I can't afford it. Now, the hobby is expensive if you do it all new. It's the reason I said eBay, and sometimes estate sales will have stuff from somebody who's passed on, and eBay will often have stuff. Also, you can scratch build. That's what I'm doing. I have a YouTube channel, which I posted up there, which is scratch building on a budget for people like me who are on a fixed income or people who just don't have a lot of money. And it's fun. So I just wanted to show you the hobby and hopefully get you interested in it. And I hope you enjoy. Thank you all for coming, and bye for now.